Everyone. Welcome to our very first Que Sepas. We're hoping that this becomes a regular series in which we dive into a variety of topics that affect and impact Latino community. For today, we want to focus on some of the work that All in Education is doing out in the field. With COVID-19 and a variety of other issues, a lot of the issues that we've been having as a community have been elevated to levels that have not been seen. And this pandemic allows for a variety of things, but mainly for us to have a real conversation about what needs to be done and who needs to lead in that action. And so I'm excited to just one, welcome you, but two, to actually have this conversation and to hear from stakeholders about the issues that are important to them. And so before we dive into just a million things, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Danny Hernandez. I'm the Community Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for All in Education. I've been on staff for about 2 months now, and I'm really committed to the work and ensuring that Latino students, Latino families have access to equal opportunities in the state. Next, I want to introduce All in Education's Executive Director, Stephanie Parra. Stephanie, do you want to
Sure, yeah. Really excited about starting this series. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Stephanie Parra. I'm the Executive Director of All in Education. I started in this role on April 1st, so 2 weeks after schools closed in the midst of the pandemic. So we'll talk more about the journey since I joined the team on April 1st in a bit, but certainly it's been an incredible ride and very excited about all the things that we're working on here at All In.
Thanks, Stephanie. Next, we have Jeff Cetino.
Hey, everyone. This is Jeff Cetino, and I've been doing research and data analytics with All In Ed.
So I want to start the conversation. So as Stephanie kind of alluded to, we are fresh to the organization, but not new to the issues. There's a deep commitment that exists here on ensuring that these issues are addressed. And so just for background, who are you in terms of why are these issues important to you? And I want to start with Jeff. Is it because you yourself identify as Latino? Is it the education piece? Is there anything in particular that connected you to this work, and how long have you been doing this work?
I would say that the reason that this work is important to me is because education has given so much to me in my life and my family. I come from a mother that came over from Mexico City. She was undocumented. She was fleeing domestic violence. She had 3 daughters with her on her journey here to LA. And then she had me and my younger sister. And I saw her struggle as a single mom, as a single parent, really, working at all hours of the day, still coming home and cooking and cleaning, and then going over our homework and making sure that education was, first and foremost, a big part of our experience. So veía cómo se, oh, and then one thing I remember vividly is at the end of the month, seeing her struggle to really make ends meet. And I remember a story within our family that her and my oldest sister at the time, unbeknownst to us youngsters, there was a couple of months where they had to go to pawn shops and really just kind of sell off family heirlooms and gold bracelets, just to kind of make ends meet. And that's why she would come home super tired and make sure that we were doing our homework and we were doing good at school. So I took that as super important to me, and I saw that reflected in my high school, where you would see the different cliques within a high school, the different communities, and then how people were being tracked. Yo de panzazo, I got good grades in junior high on a math class because I really loved the teacher, and that got me placed into a different track into high school than the kids in my community. Mm-hmm. So I saw myself kind of diverging from them freshman, sophomore, junior, to the place where I actually got into college, to UC Santa Barbara, which at the time I didn't even know was next to the beach. So here I am, Mexicanote con el nopal en su frente, in class with a bunch of kids that had BMWs and surfboards, you know, because they were gonna go surfing after class. So in education being super important, and I saw how education really impacts your whole life. And for me, it's been kind of like a survivor's guilt, right? Like I find myself in a very privileged place because of a little bit of hard work, a little bit of chance, a lot of values from my mom, but a lot of luck, you know, like a lot of luck. There's not a lot of difference between me and some of my best friends from high school that didn't make it. So why is that? And why do we come from communities that limit these opportunities and limit your ability to live a happy, fruitful, and you know, life? So for me, it's been, how do I give back? And the way that I found that I could give back the most was, you know, starting off by being, getting into community organizing, registering people to vote. And then I started taking a tour around the community just so that I could understand the problems that we face and from different perspectives, from working with the state, from working with coalition building, working in health, and then now in education, just kind of like doing that full loop and that full circle to see what is it that we can do to give our kids a better chance and more opportunity.
Well, Jeff, there's so much there, and so much of that that's so real, and a lot of it that, you know, I can even relate to, and that's, thank you for sharing all of that. Stephanie, you are from the thriving metropolis of Yuma.
Yes, yeah.
Do you go back there? Do you still keep in touch with people from there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, my family's still down there. I was born and raised in Yuma, Arizona. So for those that don't know, Yuma is on the southwest corner of our state. It borders California and Mexico. And the story of a lot of Mexican immigrants. I am first generation American. My parents are from Sonora, Mexico. And the story of a lot of us is that we come through the farm labor movement to Yuma and then kind of travel up to California as well. My story is the same as a lot of students. My family started coming in the 40s. My grandfather started coming in the 40s through the Bracero program, which was essentially immigrant workers that would come and crop the fields in Yuma and up to Lake Salinas and Northern California up there. And so I grew up much like Jeff. I feel like we all have very similar stories of a really explicit value for education when we are growing up because of our parents' either lack of or, you know, not a lot of experience with education in particular. My dad's story is really the reason why I'm so incredibly passionate about this work and why I care so deeply about equity and access to opportunity, because my dad's a brilliant man and now a self-made, you know, business owner in Yuma, works in agriculture, but he started as a farm worker. And when we were growing up, he was a farm laborer because in the 10th grade, he was attending Yuma High School and had to drop out of high school for a couple of reasons. One, as an immigrant student, he experienced discrimination in the classroom, both by his peers and educators alike. He also was a child in a family of 11 siblings on a farm worker's salary. And so that extreme level of poverty really also pushed my dad out of the education system and forced him into the workforce. At 15 years old, he became a farm worker. And unfortunately, that's the reality of a lot of students even today in Yuma, to be honest with you. And when I was growing up, my parents both, when they were growing up in Mexico, really grew up in like third world country poverty levels. My mom tells a story of, living in an adobe hut, an abandoned building for a while. That was the only shelter they could find. My dad tells would take me out to the ejidos in San Luis and show me the areas where they grew up. And it is extreme poverty. And so that's the background that my family came from. And I can remember being as young as like 5 years old and my dad taking me out to the fields with him, really like a scared straight, like, te voy a enseñar lo que es el trabajo. And so so you would take me out and show us what his work was, and it was hard labor, right? It was really hard labor. And so for me, from a very young age, it was his message to me was, you have to do well in school. Like, your education is your way out of poverty. You can't take the same path that I took. You have to do well in school, go to college, get a degree. And so that was the message that I carried with myself, my entire educational experience. And I became, the nerdy student and did well in high school. Got to ASU on a scholarship, but in my first semester at ASU, I almost lost my scholarship because I could barely pull the 2.5 GPA that I needed. That transition from Yuma to Tempe was hard. And I also, it took me some time to find a community of friends and support at ASU. ASU is a massive system. And so when students like us are transitioning to post-secondary without a support network, it makes it really hard. And often the easier path forward is to drop out and go, find that, minimum wage job that's going to pay some bills and help the family out. And so with that kind of a pressure, it's easy for kids to drop out. But fortunately for me, again, I have parents who placed a really high value on education. And even though I would call my mom that first semester crying that I was so frustrated and lost and overwhelmed, all I got on the other end was no sé qué decirte, pero aguántate. Por averíguatelas, because you're not coming back to Yuma. That was the message I got from my mom. Yeah. You gotta figure it out, sister. So I did, I worked through it, and fortunately I graduated ASU in 4 years with 2 degrees, which is not average. And so for me, the struggle of students like us is there's so many barriers in front of us, right? And so how do we create a system that's intentionally breaking down barriers and creating opportunity for Latino students, low-income families, communities of color? That's the work that I care about.
Right. And so I want to kind of piggyback off of that. So when you say students like us, what are you relating that to?
Students who share our lived experience, Latino students, many who are, some might be from first generation families, like first generation Americans, much like myself, or second generation, or they're going to be first generation college students, the first to go to college, the first to graduate high school. There's so many firsts in our community. Our stories, while very different, there's a similar theme throughout all of them every time I talk to folks. And the theme is that we value our education. We value opportunity so incredibly much. Our parents do, our families do. That's the reason why they come to this country, because of the opportunity and the American dream that is promised to all of us, right? And often our experience is not one that allows for the American dream to come true for our community.
Right. It's like our parents don't need to be convinced that education should be a top priority. They're already there. It's just everything that follows.
100%.
I hear you. Jeff, what about you? Is there anything that you'd like to add in terms of the students like us? Where do you fit into those identities?
So when Stephanie was talking about students like us, especially in first generation, first year college students, we all know the stats. It's disheartening to see all of the energy that we put into these kids, high schoolers, to get into college, and then in college, a lot of them drop out. And I think that we experience some of the same things, right? And I remember going into my first classes and feeling underprepared. So you're sitting down in a huge auditorium with 500 people, maybe 3 of them are Latino, and you're feeling like you don't belong because you're unprepared and you're catching up. So now you're catching up, and on top of all that, you're like, well, I don't look like everybody else. I don't my dorm mate is, talking about things that I don't really understand. Like, who am I now? Like, and then the pressure of like, I'm representing my community and my family, and there's so much pressure. And as a 17 or 18-year-old kid having to deal with that and catch up at the same time, I think it's super difficult, like I think
for
it's
sure.
super difficult. I remember third year in college where I kind of had, the hang of things. I was like, oh, well, like I took it as a strength. It's like, I'm here in spite of.
Right.
But then right after that, it's kind of like, I'm here in spite of, but F that. Why does it have to be in spite of? Like, why do we have to take this really difficult journey?
Right.
And I'll just riff off of that, because there's like, I think for me, everything clicked when I was in graduate school. So in graduate school, I have my master's in higher and post-secondary education. So I studied college students, right? Essentially, how they succeed or don't succeed, and what are the reasons why some make it and some drop out and don't complete their degrees, etc. And so it was in that, like, not just in the coursework, but I was also teaching first year freshmen at ASU as well. And I was learning about student development theory, right? And how students evolve and grow. And researchers like Dr. Laura Rendon out of Texas, like she writes about, her research is a lot about Latino students, and how as Latinas as well, like we find value and connection in community and support, right? And so there's a lot of research about how students' identities and student groups kind of gravitate towards each other on college campuses across the country. And so I found, like, one of my best friends to this day, Israel Barajas, if you're watching, hi Izzy. He's someone who I found at the university, who was 2 years ahead of me and could really like help me and guide me and introduce me to different folks who were willing to provide guidance and support. If it wasn't by chance that we found each other at ASU and we bonded, because he's from Ajo, I'm from Yuma, like two small border towns, rural Arizona, now living in the big city, right? Like, so that level of connection matters. It matters to students. And so if we are not intentionally creating support networks, I was teaching first year freshmen almost 8 years later, studying the research, teaching first year freshmen, and realizing that everything that I had experienced 8 years before as a freshman at ASU, not much had changed for the students that I was teaching. My students were overwhelmed. They were struggling, that transition, especially our first generation college students. So our systems and our institutions have to recognize that we have to adapt and create opportunity and supports for our students. Otherwise, it is very easy for them to withdraw from the education experience. And I say now, as a school board member at Phoenix Union, like, it is how easy it is. It was a little harder for me to go back to Yuma, but it is very easy for a kid from Maryvale and West Phoenix to just say, you know what, sorry, Tempe is not the life. I'm gonna head back to my neighborhood and my community, because that's home. And so how are we creating that welcoming, inclusive environment? It matters.
Yep, for sure. So thank you both for sharing us those stories. I do want to just bring up one more piece on Yuma. So I brought up Yuma earlier because it was a little bit intentional. I had the privilege of meeting a few educators from Yuma a few weeks ago. One of them happened to be Stephanie's teacher. Now he's a principal. The three of them are Latino. And the three of them work, in this school, and had so much just, wasn't profound philosophy on like how to do it, but they've been there forever, and they had taught Stephanie, and here we are. I don't want to say decades later, having these conversations with these same people who've seen it through. Like what? And I thought about my own experience and not having one Latino teacher till college. And how that would have shifted my perspective. And so, Stephanie, what is Yuma doing differently Why are teachers not leaving that district? And why are you still, you still have a strong relationship with your educators?
Well, I think it's the community. I mean, Yuma is it is such an incredible community. And the principal Arvizo at San Luis High School, Mr. Arvizo was my marketing teacher at Cibola High School when I was in Cibola. We were chatting about like making smoothies in the bookstore. Like that was he was one of the cool teachers, and really, like, again, that shared identity, shared connection. And we've been talking about a lot about the lack of representation in classrooms and boardrooms. And, that's the entire reason why All in Education came to exist. And it matters. My first Latina teacher, even in Yuma when I was growing up, was not until 7th grade. And it was Miss Cisneros, my English teacher at Crane Junior High. Like, I remember her, and she stands out because she was the first teacher that could speak to me in Spanish, and that would like talk to me like my mom. So I knew I was like, oh gosh, I'm in trouble. Like
that's effective, yeah.
So she, that like those connections really matter. And Mr. Arvizo and his team lead San Luis High School, which is 99.9% Latino.
Yeah.
Data. It's pretty Latino down there. It is the community, and it's an incredible community. And so I think that, I mean, Yuma will always be special to me. Like I said, I still go back there often. My nephew's going to school now at Cibola, where I went to school. My sister works down there. My parents live and work down there. I have lots of family down there. So it's a vibrant community, and it also needs support. I feel like because we're on the border of Mexico and California, we often get lost. And honestly, growing up, I felt more connected to California than I did to even Phoenix, because it was literally on the other side of the river. TV channels are linked. I've mentioned that to you guys. Like, the media comes from Imperial Valley often, and a lot of the big networks are linked to San Diego. So we have to do more work in making sure that all the talent that's in Yuma is tapped for our state. Absolutely.
And so All in Education is a newer organization, but has been doing work on the ground for a while now. And one of the things that it has spearheaded is community conversations to have a real understanding and direct feedback from the folks who are being impacted on what their needs are. And so this year, All in Education led these community dialogues at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. Was that about when it started, the dialogues? And so can either of you tell me a little bit about the dialogues? Where were they? Who did they involve? What did you hear in terms of the needs of the Latino community in Arizona?
I can kick us off with some background, and then I'd love for Jeff to share his role in the work as well. So, I mentioned I started in this role on April 1st. It was 2 weeks after schools closed in the midst of the pandemic. And for our founder, Luis and I, we sat down and we really, we had all the plans for how we were going to launch All in Ed and how we were going to get started, and then quickly scrapped all those plans because it is really important to us to make sure that whatever we do, that we are responding to the needs of the community. And so as I transitioned into this role, and folks were asking us, what recommendations do you have? What does the Latino community need? How can we help? We put a pause on giving recommendations before listening to the community. So we launched All In for Arizona's Future. It was a campaign that lasted 4.5 weeks. We held community conversations on virtual platforms, much like this, Zoom, Facebook Live. We did Spanish television, Spanish radio, a live phone bank with a media partner as well. And all in all, we had 13 conversations. We reached 200 parents and educators in Phoenix Metro, Pima County, so Maricopa County, Pima County, the Tucson area, and then Yuma County. And we did that work intentionally with those target markets, if you will, because they are the top 3 markets that have Latino students and families. So it was really important to listen to those communities and hear their biggest challenges as they transition to distance learning. So I'll toss it over to Jeff to share kind of what we heard in these conversations.
Yeah, definitely. As I think, well, we heard a lot, right? We heard a lot within the conversations. And I think in the back of my mind, it was kind of like, well, we don't know what we're going to hear, but we come from these communities. So we can anticipate some of these things that we're going to hear, right? So for us, as we started thinking about putting this report together, we really wanted to kind of like lay the foundation for not just COVID itself, but COVID in the context, geographic and time-wise, of how it's impacting our Latino community, because we knew that it was going to impact our community disproportionately. And that's what we saw, right?
Right.
So we wanted to couch all of our reporting and dialogues in this bigger context of the education system in Arizona, all of the other social determinants of education of Arizona, and why we were going to see this disproportionate effect within our families and our students. So we wanted to talk about the social determinants of health and kind of like how we were already at risk health-wise, and we were already at risk education-wise. And now we have this situation that's going to impact our families. Do we just kind of take those punches and those blows, or do we use this as a moment to really start to reimagine and rethink what this education system in Arizona can look like? And the only reason that we were able to, or the only way that we were going to be able to begin to do that, was to listen to our community. So I could go over some of the facts or some of the things that we heard from our community.
Yeah, it was there a participant who stood out to you, or who you still has ingrained themselves in your mind based off of maybe an anecdote or story they told you?
Yeah, well, one thing that stands out in my mind is specifically access to technology. So it was easy for me to anticipate that, hey, people are gonna lack access to technology, right? Like, we don't all have a computer. What I didn't anticipate was parents telling me, ¿sabes qué? I have 4 kids and 1 laptop. So technically I have a laptop and I have access, but how am I gonna get my 4 kids to line up and share this 1 computer to do homework when all of their classes are happening at the same time, let alone login issues or understanding Google or Zoom that I barely kind of like learned how to use.
Right.
That was one thing that really stood out in my mind.
I think for me, the other thing, that we talk about in the breakdown and the transition, and really what we want school systems to learn moving forward, is that communication matters, right? Engagement with families matters, absolutely. Like, by the time we spoke to some parents, I had, and Jeff was on these calls as well, by our live phone bank, which took place in May, we had parents on the phone in tears and frustration because they had not heard back from their school community since mid-March. So 2 months they've been trying to get in touch with their schools and not getting calls back. Predominantly Spanish-speaking families who, while the school is saying we're sending emails, we're sending communication, the parents are saying like, I don't have an email, or like, I don't know where this communication is going. It's not in Spanish. I don't understand it. And so there was a huge disconnect and a breakdown in communication. So moving forward, we absolutely need system leaders to recognize that they have to get creative. And I think for us, it was even a learning experience, Jeff, right? Like we started started our campaign in like just a Zoom environment. And when only 5 people showed up to that, we got to do something different, right? By the end of the series, we had a live phone bank with hundreds of people calling in, right? And so that just getting creative about how you outreach absolutely matters.
Right.
And it's something that we learned even as an organization along the way.
And
And
then
so,
if I
so
could
I
add
do,
to that a little bit. So another thing about kind of like the evolution of like those phone calls, our second phone call, we had a lot of teachers from Mesa. And I personally got a lot of insight into like what teachers were going through as well, right? And how they were dealing almost like on a post-traumatic stress way of hearing these families giving, like calling into the school and saying like, I need help, but not only with school, I need help with this and this and this and that. And as we had that second call and then moving on through the campaign till that phone bank that Stephanie was talking about, I fielded a call where it was a grandpa talking about, you know, his grandchildren and how he needed support. And he was talking to us in Spanish. And it was like, yeah, you know, like I feel like a social worker again, where I need to case manage this guy and try to connect him with a bunch of resources,
right.
kind of to do with education, but not 100%. So education becoming this part of like this whole community fabric where it's not just the classroom, but it's
Right.
the surrounding community kind of like taking care of our parents and grandparents.
And that was one thing that, to the point, Jeff, like that was one thing, you know, it really was to no fault of the institutions, the school systems. Like we're asking really massive systems to flip their brick and mortar operations to distance learning overnight, right? And so like if there were bumps along the road, well, like, hello, you just asked a, you know, 125-year institution in Phoenix Union's case to like transfer all of our operations to distance learning. So yeah, there were bumps along the way. But I think what stood out the most in this is like all of us, and I remember for myself personally, like how hard that vote to close schools was, because I know how critical a role we play in the lives of the families that we serve. Over 80% of the population is on free and reduced price lunch. We make sure that our kids have breakfast and lunch, right? Like those are two meals that we provide that the family relies on 5 days a week. Like that is, and so getting those like recognizing or realizing that we have set up schools to be social service agencies, and then we've starved them from the resources to adequately support the communities that they're in, right? And so that absolutely was a huge like eye-opening experience, is that we have to support our school systems in making sure that they have the resources that they need to support the communities that they're serving in. The digital divide issue is a big one. It continues to be a big one. There are still thousands of students that don't have access to either a laptop computer or Wi-Fi yet. And that was something that presented itself in the conversations. But it's, you know, it also went beyond just lack of access. To Jeff's point, like if there's multiple kids in the class, in the home, you need multiple laptops and you need stronger bandwidth on your internet.
Right.
And so like without that, like the struggle is real for families.
Yeah.
The struggle is very real. I mean, how many times have we dropped off of our own Zoom calls because our, you know, our tech problems? So yeah, there's a lot of work to do, and recognizing that you know, as this year moves along, we will have to adapt and adjust our and really, you know, listen to the needs of the community and meet the moment. And I think that's how we want to operate as All In.
There's a lot of great stuff here, and I do have a follow-up for you, Stephanie, but I want to just go to some of the findings that they're reporting. You guys mentioned a few of them, but lack of communication in both English and Spanish is the first one. Technology issues, which you've covered. Parents' lack of tools to support at-home learning. Economic challenges, and populations at risk of falling behind, which includes special education, English learners, etc. And so through these dialogues, these are the findings. And then parent concerns, in similar vein, parallel those findings. Stephanie, when it comes to making decisions that are impacting hundreds of families, as in your capacity as a school board member, Phoenix Union made the decision to stay closed when?
We made that decision in the summer. So it was in late June, early July. And so we will be in distance learning for all of Q1. So through, like October 2nd. And then I think for us, it is important. One of the things we heard from the community, and this is educators and parents alike, that they want decisive leadership, and they also want planning time, right? And so when we made that decision for all of Q1, it like I was met with, kind of overwhelming sighs of relief from educators and parents, just to know, like, okay, this is the plan. We can now adjust our home lives and plan for distance learning for at least all of Q1. And we also said that we would make a decision about Q2 by September, so that folks can plan for all of Q2. And that we wouldn't be making like day by day or week to week decisions,
right.
Because that's what creates, we've seen it, right? It creates.
We call those districts out. Yeah, no, we know who they are.
Yeah.
Who are doing this and putting, not putting the community first in that sense. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the next steps for All in Ed, specifically the All in Education Equity Framework. I know that there's been, in your decision making, and in putting the community first, that's certainly within our equity framework, the most important pieces of it. And so, why is this consideration? Why is this the call to action? And what kind of response have you received? Either Jeff or Stephanie.
Yeah, I can share, and Jeff, feel free to jump in here. So the all in equity framework, or All In for Equity framework, is a toolkit in the report. Folks can download the report at allined.org/report. We'll make sure that we put that in the comments. But yeah, we wanted something for system leaders, decision makers, parents, students to have as a tool to inform how they make decisions. So, for us, I mentioned it was really important for us to make sure that we were listening to community first, listening to the community that is being impacted by COVID at the highest rates, not just in infection rates, economically impacted and burdened by COVID. And then make recommendations. And often what happens, I've been in a lot of rooms where we come together as lobbyists, policymakers, you name it, board members, etc., and we make decisions for entire communities without listening to the community first. And so the framework really is a tool to guide decision makers in keeping the community involved in the decision-making process, and really to make sure that decisions are going to yield opportunity for Latino youth of color, and low-income families, that we aren't putting out new policies, new practices, or new programs that actually do more harm than good, no matter how well-intentioned we are. If the new policy that's set into motion has unintended consequences, you have to evaluate that and assess it. And what we've seen in Arizona for a really long time, this is highlighted in our report, is that decision after decision has been made to the detriment of our community. And the result is that the gap in achievement between Latino students and their white peers is only growing. And so when we sit and we ask ourselves, why aren't we moving, making progress on our goals here? It is because those decisions have not been informed by our community. And so for us, that equity framework is a tool that, organizations, school systems, and folks really wanting to be advocates for equity can adopt. We have had a great response. We can also put the link in the chat for individuals that want to sign in support of the framework. But we have organizations like Center for the Future of Arizona has adopted. School systems, Yuma Union High School District was the first to officially adopt this. And other local school systems are considering as well. Phoenix Union, I think Tucson Unified as well, and other local charters that we've worked with. So We think that once we have alignment on how we make decisions and that our decisions are grounded in equity and creating opportunity, our theory is that that will then drive change and move the needle, actually improve outcomes academically for Latino students in Arizona.
And so when you say districts and others have signed on to the pledge, what does that involve?
Yeah, so in the report, there is a toolkit that there is a community pledge that folks can sign on. So let's say I'm the leader of this organization and I sign the pledge saying all in education is all in for equity, right? Other nonprofit organizations, community members can take that pledge. There's also a model school board resolution. If I am on a school board or I'm a superintendent and I want to change how our system makes decisions or really guide our decision-making process in equity, in this equity framework, I can adopt that model school board resolution and make a commitment to implement this framework and use the framework as a guide for our decisions locally. And like I said, we have had both advocacy organizations and nonprofits and school systems already adopt. Our goal is to grow that list of supporters. And really, we think that this applies to equity and access to opportunity. Is not just, it's certainly for us, it's education, but when you think about, there's a question here about how do we improve the quantity and quality of whole children, right? Like their whole lives. It goes beyond education policy. It's about health policy. It's about economic policy, access to jobs in the economy, access to fair wages and healthcare benefits. Like all these things matter. And oftentimes it is our community, the Latino community, who does not have access to these resources and supports. And so we're sitting here asking ourselves why our students aren't achieving. And I think that's the wrong question to be asking. Our students are not a deficit. They are an asset and they bring value to the table. We have to create policies that support them.
How would you convey the word equity? Like if I'm asking for not a definition, but why is that the value that is paramount here?
I think, for us, there can be a debate between equity, equality, and what the difference is. And when we think about equitable representation, it is representation that is on par with the needs in the community. For example, just as an example, when 46% of the student population is Latino and 15% of the teaching workforce is Latino, there's an inequitable representation, right? When less than 10% of the education state board appointees are Latino and they're making decisions on behalf of 46% of the student population and actually all of the student population. That lack of representation absolutely matters. And so for us, it is important that we have equitable representation so that we can get better outcomes for our students, and that we have it matters to understand that not all students are created equal, not all families have the same access to resources. And when you know that as a policymaker and as a leader in our community, when you recognize that there are unfortunately there are systems that the system was not built for us or for our community to thrive in, and it takes intention. It takes operating with intention to dismantle the barriers for low-income families, for families of color, for Latino youth. And I say that because when we talk about equity at Phoenix Union, it has often been like equity is what we live and breathe. It is what we do as an organization. It has not always been the case at Phoenix Union, let's be real. We're 125 years old. When your country is founded on racism, there is racism in your system, right? And so like, it takes operating with intention to dismantle those systems of oppression that our country was built on. And so what were those poor practices? In a system like Phoenix Union, it was creating a school for colored students, right? Carver High School was a school for our Black. And in Phoenix Union, it looked like different programs and opportunities for students of color, Latino students versus their white peers. And now you look at the system now and ask yourself why it is still segregated. And again, I would argue that it's because we're making decisions without us at the table, without our community at the table.
Right. And if I could jump in a little bit. So the All In Ed team has been listening to a podcast, what is it? The
Nice White Parents.
Nice wife.
Well-meaning nice white parents.
Something like that, yeah.
So I've been binging on it, and it's interesting because you see how uninformed, slightly racist practices happen sometimes out of a benign situation, right? Like you want to do the right thing, but you only know what you know, and you act from the experience that you have, right? And I think that's why we're saying that lived experience is so important and representation is so important. So we need our communities' lived experience to be represented at school boards, because that lived experience is going to inform some of these practices that we see happening at the school board level and also at the state level. So I love that. I love the equity framework, and then I love All In Ed's mission itself, because it's kind of like a 1-2 punch. So the equity framework is what you can do now, right? Like, let's see what you can do now, because a lot of times we get stuck in administration, we get stuck with, board discussions, and we just do the next logical thing without taking a pause and saying, okay, are we really thinking about this issue holistically? And that framework really takes you down, step by step on how to sit down, look at the whole issue, and try to make the best decision possible right now. But in the future, we know that we need larger systems work and larger systems change. So that's why we're advocating for more of a balance in representation, because we need our lived experience at that table to really fill out the picture of what's going on and what's going to work. We might all agree that we need X, Y, and Z, but let's be a little bit more intentional about how do we achieve X, Y, and Z by including that lived experience.
I like that, and I really appreciate it. It reminds me of recent conversations about the way to fund schools, and wanting quick solutions versus a solution that does take into account the needs, the highest needs of all the communities that are involved. And so I think we're about to be out of time here. I've really appreciated this conversation and taking a little bit of a dive into this report. There's a lot we didn't even touch, and I appreciate you sharing some of your personal stories. We do have a question that I wanted to ask you. The question is, given the high and increasing health disparities affecting the Latino community, how do we improve the quantity and quality of whole child education in K-12 schools to help kids become more life ready, not just college and career ready? And that's from Scott Turner.
So if I could take a quick little stab at this one. That's a good question, Scott. And I think it's difficult because it's so involved, right? I spent a little bit of time with the county and with the state working on public health issues. And one thing that I recognized really quickly when I started working with All In Ed and looking at some of education issues is that it's all so interrelated, right? Vitalist Health Foundation talks about the social determinants of health, or the health wheel, and how everything impacts our communities, where we live, where we work, where we play, where we pray. It's all an interconnected web. So when we start talking about just education or just health disparities, we can't decouple them, without understanding that our communities are whole communities. Now, I love the question about the Latino community and Latino kids, but we also have African-American kids, and we also have white kids that live in disadvantaged areas of Arizona, right? Take AJ, take Sauk Phoenix, and take Maryvale. We're all living amongst similar situations with similar problems. So it's not only like a race, but it's a race coupled with economics, coupled with health, coupled with the lack of opportunity. So in order to prepare our youngest kids to be life ready, along with career and college ready, it's going to take a wholesale look at how we provide for opportunities. And how we provide for opportunities as a state is, how do we fund social services? How do we fund education? How do we fund all of these auxiliary community services to make sure that we have healthy and vibrant communities, and not just, healthy sectors here and there?
Reminds me of just the access to testing for the coronavirus, and where that was readily available, and where there were hours and hours of waits and limited access. And it was clear the disparities between the communities of color and those that were not. And so as we conclude here, I just wanted to end on a different type of note. And so I'm gonna ask one more question. And it's what we call la chancla. For those of you who aren't familiar, la chancla is a sandal that was used for disciplinary measures as a kid. And so we're going to use it as a conversation piece to end in our segments. And so if you could throw the chancla at anything, Stephanie, what is causing you angst this week? What is something you are canceling? What are you throwing the chancla at?
So really quickly, Danny, I think we forgot about our cultural icon in the beginning, so I don't want to leave the call without that.
Okay. We'll do that one. 2 more questions then. We can do it. So Stephanie, what are you throwing the chancla at?
I'm gonna throw the chancla at, I'm stealing, and I'm gonna throw the chancla at Arizona's hellish summer this year.
Yes.
I'm over it. Throw the chancla at it.
Jeff, what about you?
To sound super weird and nerdy, like throw the chancla at the stock market. Like, it's nuts how it's gained over 50% of its value through a pandemic. So, I'm sure that's a complicated reasons why, but throw a big ass chancla at the stock market and why people are making money off of a pandemic.
All right. The chanclas have been thrown. And so the final question of the afternoon. Going back to some of the earlier conversations, talked about identity and some of the things that you resonated with your life and how you ultimately identify yourself. Say that All in Education is going to remake the Loteria card. We all know what the Loteria card is. It's like Mexican bingo. It has the iconic Sirenas, Borracho, those figures. So we're going to replace all of those with cultural icons that represent an element of your identity. Jeff, who would you suggest to go on the new Loteria card?
Do you want to go first?
I could go
Anything? It could be a person, place, thing, part of the rosary, like whatever you.
So I had trouble with this one because I don't want to go to like, some of them that I've said before. So for me, it's been Los Panchos. I love Los Panchos. Like, I remember, like, I don't know if it was high school or college, but I used to go to sleep with some of like those boleros, and my mom didn't listen to them very much, and my dad didn't. I just kind of came across them, and I love Los Panchos, the trio music, and a Loteria card wouldn't be complete without those three dudes, and Eddie Gourmet, and la cantadora también, la cantante.
Okay, well, we'll accept it. Stephanie?
So I have, I joke every time I'm in a meeting, I have 2 of my female superheroes. So for me, I would either go with, I'm trying to think, I can't decide which one. So next time I will give a different one. But for today, I'm gonna go with Linda Carter, Wonder Woman. She was Latina, She's a first
I did
female
not know that.
superhero. Okay, so yeah, like Wonder Woman where it's at.
Those are good ones. Okay. We'll see what other folks come up with, and maybe we'll vote on a finalist.
See, when we get into year 3 of this, it's going to be really difficult.
Oh, we're not. No. Once we fill up the cards, that's final for all the years to come. No, but thank you for everyone who was able to join us. So much to look at, and a lot of exciting things in the future. Thank you, Stephanie and Jeff, for taking the time to do this. The next conversation will be in 2 weeks. Que Sepas, focused on the word Latinx. What is it? Where did it come from? Why are people saying it? And are we gonna start using it? Why or why not? Feel free to join us then. Look on our Facebook page for additional information. Until then, have a good day.